Despite being best mates and weathering everything from on air spats to global controversies to legal fights, Jackie Henderson announced in a statement that she could no longer work with her longtime co host, Kyle Sandilands. The radio network they worked for, ARN, issued a statement to the ASX confirming their KIIS FM show, which aired in Sydney and in Melbourne, had been axed. Not only that, but Henderson's $100 million contract was terminated, and Sandilands, worth the same amount, was possibly in breach and at risk of being torn up. Craig Bruce was Kyle and Jackie O's first content director on Today FM Breakfast. He is also the host of Game Changers Radio podcast. Here's my chat with Craig. Craig Bruce, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing today. Look, you've been talking with Kyle throughout this whole saga. Were you blindsided by this announcement?
Blindsided. Well, I only spoke to Kyle once, and he sounded pretty confident that whilst there were some concerns around him not being exactly sure where Jackie's head was at, that he felt like they would be able to work through it as they have in previous, times. And so I'm not blindsided, shocked, but not surprised. I mean, at the end of the day, speaking to people around the show, they have all said the same thing, which is none of them expected the show to last 10 years. And they talked about how Kyle and Jackie are now two very different people, living very different lives. Not a lot of communication happening off the air in between the songs, which is always a bad sign. So there was enough, what people hear or have heard is that final kind of confrontation that was on the air at 10 to 9. But that wasn't the reason she's left. There's obviously a lot of back and forth, and that has been, playing out for quite a while now.
Let's talk about the $200 million deal, which, grabbed headlines right across the country when it was announced in 2024 that they had signed a $200 million deal to stay on ARN doing KIIS Breakfast in Sydney and eventually Melbourne for 10 years. Like you just said, they'd signed this deal that was 10 years long. Was that the straw that broke the camel's back? Like, were there whispers in the industry prior to that deal, or was the pressure of fulfilling that promise and, the amount of money they were being paid and also a lot of redundancies at ARN to help pay for it, was that, do you think, what spelled the end for Kyle and Jackie O?
Definitely a factor. I think what has happened is that they have received that massive payday, and then neglected to think about the work that needed to be done to live up to the terms of the contract. And they, it takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of effort and energy to do a breakfast radio show for any length of time. And I don't think anyone's done it at the quality and quantity that Kyle and Jack have done over the last 25 years. So it's a long time to be together in the same studio. And I think that they ran out of steam. And you look at the Melbourne launch, so they were in Sydney, very successful and are still successful in Sydney, but they never really captured the Melbourne audience. They didn't care enough. It was a combination of hubris and laziness, to be honest. They wouldn't get on a plane and go to the market. They weren't interested in Melbourne as a city and understanding how it was different to Sydney. And so all of that, I think, just showed that they were, two people who had climbed the mountain in their 50s, had other things happening in their lives. They both have children. In the Kyle and Jackie O show that I remember, they were killers. They would have done whatever it took to win, whether it was in Sydney or Melbourne or whatever market. But this version that we saw in 2024 and 25 in Melbourne, they just didn't make enough effort. And I think the audience realised it and paid it back in kind.
So what do you think ARN is doing now in response? Because, I mean, a lot of people said it at the time, this was a mistake to sign them on this much money for this amount of time. Is this one of the biggest blunders in Australian radio history?
Well, if they can get out of this alive without Kyle suing them and whatever might happen, I think ultimately it will work out. It's the best end result for ARN. So there's just no way in the world that a 10-year contract, in 2034, that any radio company would have been paying two hosts, $20 million a year. So that the contract was crazy. And the fact that they have found an opening, I think they would be doing cartwheels, to be honest. But they're about to, so the initial thrill of, okay, there might be a way through this, will soon be uh, replaced by the reality of the audience going elsewhere, and that will happen. So the Kyle and Jackie fan base, it's 20 years in the making. They love this show. You either love the show or hate them. There's no in between, and they have a huge loyal following. And they're going to have to find a new breakfast show. So what's at stake in Sydney, the biggest market in Australia for radio, is a 13-share breakfast show that's likely to be a 6 or 7 or an 8 within 6 months. And so stations like Nova and Today FM and Gold and possibly Triple M are likely to pick up audience. Podcasts like yours, it's hard to know where the audience will go because there is no obvious choice. But it's one thing to make the call. It's another to think, okay, how do we replace these people? And they are irreplaceable. And I have been through that process before at Today FM in 2013. We foolishly thought, well, we'll be able to recover. It might take a while, but we'll get there. And we never did, literally.
Yeah, well, I'd like you to give us a little bit more context because a lot of people listening to this either would never have listened to the show or, wouldn't have liked them or wouldn't maybe understand the powerhouse that was Kyle and Jackie O. Can you explain that to us? Like, take us through, when you were working with them and their early career and their early stint on Sydney Breakfast Radio to the point that they were signing a $200 million radio deal. Like, how did we get here?
Well, I mean, when I met them in 2004-5, there was no daylight between the two of them. I hadn't worked with a show that was as close and as connected as they were. They were great friends. They planned for the show at each other's homes. They spent a lot of time together. They liked the same things. They laughed at the same jokes. They finished each other's sentences, and they were very protective of each other. They never fought. They fought with us, but they never fought with each other. They were killers. They just would do whatever it took. Famously, I've talked about this before. At the start of every planning meeting on a Monday, Jackie would look at all of us and say, okay, what are we going to do to get noticed this week? And she would look at all of us in the eye and she would expect an answer, and it needed to be good. Their determination and their discipline and their expectation around quality of product was like something I'd never seen before. And clearly that has drifted and over the years for a number of reasons. And the feedback that I have got from their audience through our Instagram feed is that they have noticed already that the show is different and it's not what it was. So I think it's drifted. And in a way, I'm glad that it didn't peter out. I mean, this is a classic Kyle and Jack. I mean, if the show was going to end, it was going to end with a drama. Clearly, this is one.
Look, we can't talk about Kyle and Jack without talking about the controversies as well. And there are quite a few and some quite high-profile ones. What did you make of, Kyle's broader, I suppose, reputation in Australia? Because if you were a fan of the Kyle and Jackie O show, you loved him and you thought he told it like it was and he was amazing and funny and had great wit and just said what everyone else was thinking. But a lot of people really openly hated him. How did he manage to survive in the industry so long when, so many people did not like him?
That reputation, and we could run through the incidents, there's plenty of them, is well earned. And, he's made some really serious misjudgments over the years. And because he is in the moment and he speaks first before filtering, that's the thing that makes him unique as a presenter, and it's the thing that's got him into trouble over so many years. He's a complicated person. I'll give you an example. My daughter was 3 when I started at Today FM in 2004, and there were all these superstars at Today FM, and none of them knew her. She'd often come in on a Friday afternoon to come and see me. And he would, without knowing who I was, would bring her into the studio and get at her eye level and show her around and give her any CDs that were for free and whatever. So he's got this beautiful, warm side to him, and the audience hear that. That's that parasocial component, that the audience hear the whole part of Kyle, and it's complicated. They know he's a big bear, and sometimes he's angry and other times he's not. And people that don't hear the show only hear the negative commentary, and there's plenty. They're funny, they're self-deprecating, they have depth and warmth, and they can be really offensive as well. And that was annoying as someone that worked with them. It's like, dude, can we just have the good part? But that's not possible. You've got to take the full package.
I'm curious to know what your analysis is at this early stage of the fallout from the axing of Kyle and Jackie O as to what will happen in terms of the broader Australian radio landscape. I mean, for someone who maybe doesn't understand it that well, what do you think is going to happen next?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think that FM radio will be a heck of a lot more boring without them, and they really have been the benchmark for a number of years. And people listening to this might be wanting to throw tomatoes at their phones as I say this, but Australian radio internationally is known as one of the best markets in the world because of two shows, Hamish and Andy and Colin Jackie O, and without having them. Drive conversation and drive us all mad, it's going to be a very different market. And I hope that there's a next generation of shows that can come along that can excite us and energize us in a way that Kyle and Jack, when they were at their best, did on a regular basis. So that's the hope. And, there are plenty of talented people in audio now, and we think of audio as podcasting and radio, and there are plenty at Listener, people like Lou and Jarch who are amazing. And, could they do a breakfast show? Absolutely. The hope is that we can find a really exciting young team. I'm saying the industry can, and we can go again.
Is there any chance of the pair rekindling, or is this definitely the end?
I think it's the end. I think Kyle is going to be really hurt by this, and I think you're talking about who's been blindsided. I think he has been. I think he will be at the moment really hurt, and I think he's going to get really angry. I think we're going to see him in court. No, I don't think we'll ever see them in a studio together. And hey, it's been a great run, right? 25 years, it's better than any other show in Australia has done. They've had some amazing moments. They've had some terrible moments that have kind of brought us together as well in a way. But you've got to kind of admire their resilience and consistency over a long period of time.
Craig Bruce, thank you so much for joining us on the briefing today.
You're welcome.